be hopping on. So we'll just introduce to y'all real quickly who we have for those who might not know David and Andy, and let them take on over. So Nicole, actually, you'll flip through these next couple of slides for me. So who are we as ULI Louisiana? For any of you who don't know us, we are part of a worldwide organization that focuses on land use. So in our area, we're developers, architects, engineers, contractors, attorneys, financial managers, brokers, public officials, and students. We have a large contingent actually of Tulane students, as well as LSU students who participate. And ULI Louisiana is actually a statewide organization. And so that's one thing that's been nice in the virtual world, is it's easier for us to pull together from different areas. Next. What we do. So we just wanted to give people a better understanding as we have these opportunities of what it is that ULI has that's unique. So one thing that we do that's unique is we have these technical assistance panels. So the most recent one we did was in Fat City in Jefferson Parish, doing it for the Councilwoman Van Franken, where they were looking to try to figure out how best to reuse this space. We've done one for Auctioner on Jefferson Highway. It's an opportunity to get some thought leaders together and professionals together to look at a problem, to look at a question that you have, and help come up with suggestions as to what you should do to solve that problem. So if that strikes you as something that, oh, I know someone who would really benefit from that, please let us know, and we'd be very happy to help you set that up. Next, some upcoming stuff. So we're going to do this for 3 more weeks, these Thursday afternoons. So next week we have the Odeon. We're taking a break for Thanksgiving, though if you're bored on Thanksgiving, maybe we can hang out. And then beginning of December, we have a look at the New Orleans restaurant industry, and of course, always looking at some of the land use proposition thereabout. And then a couple representatives of, well, representative from the World War II Museum, as well as from Mathis Breer, looking at that master plan and how it has evolved over the last 15, 16 years. We also have tomorrow, actually, there's part of our partnership with New Orleans Business Alliance. We have these breakfasts, and there's one tomorrow morning, and then always opportunities for getting engaged through the new member or interested in upping your anti-member orientation. So that's all the information on the who are we and what are we doing. Of course, we couldn't do what we do without people being willing to support us. So thank you to our annual sponsors. So today is week 2 of a content series that we are piloting here for ULI Louisiana. And we have the privilege today to have Andy Sternad and David Waggoner from Waggoner Ball Architects. So I know a number of you are familiar with Waggoner and Ball, which is an award-winning, internationally active architecture and planning practice located here in New Orleans. The firm grounds its architectural work in historic preservation with a concentration on modern institutional projects, including museums, foundations, and educational facilities. So we have here with us today David Waggoner, who is founding principal of Waggoner and Ball. He is a graduate of the Yale School of Architecture, a fellow in the AIA, a recipient of the AIA Louisiana Medal of Honor. And in the aftermath of Katrina, David saw an opportunity for New Orleans to reinvent itself as a sustainable city that embraces its lifeblood of water. Since then, the firm's portfolio has grown to include watershed planning projects in Louisiana, urban water projects in Connecticut, Virginia, South Carolina, Texas, and Chennai, India, and building campus and park design projects in Louisiana and Beijing, China. So I suspect many of you have seen some of the work, the planning work Waggoner and Ball has done in this area, which is just so exciting and energizing. Andy is the leader of Waggoner and Ball's urban water practice, planning practice. He's trained as an architect at Washington University in St. Louis and Yale. And Andy helped lead the firm's recent Dutch Dialogues Charleston effort. The Water as Leverage team in Chennai, if I'm saying Chennai, right? Chennai, one of y'all correct me.
Yeah.
Okay. India, the planning and architectural design for the Ile de Jean Charles community relocation, and the design and implementation of the urban scale projects in New Orleans. So with all of those super impressive things that I would have struggled to remember, but like all are wrapped up in the impressive work that is Waggoner and Ball's urban water practice, I'm going to turn it over to David Waggoner to take us away. Oh, I'm sorry, one more administrative thing. If you have questions you would like to put in the chat, please put them there and we will attend to them as we go on. I apologize, David, go ahead.
No apology, Antique. I'm happy that you invited us. Thanks for having us. I won't speak long. I'll let Andy present this bit of our work to you. I think we started this 15 years ago because there was a bad flood in New Orleans and people seem to be a bit amiss about what to do. And then we have all the repeated flooding in New Orleans and around Louisiana, and so do we in these other places that you work. Norfolk flooded today. So what this is about markets in need. There's a real need for the market to address this. There are all these industries that are around doing things that maybe the market doesn't need as much anymore. So I'd ask those of you listening today to think about, well, why is this not a primary market in New Orleans, Louisiana? Why is it we've treated this as it would be nice and it's not essential? And then in James Carville's terms, why aren't we looking for ways to make money doing this? Now, that may be too specific for ULI, not normally the way we might introduce this material, but I'm going to let Andy talk today. I think you're going to talk about Louisiana today, Andy, and there's plenty of water cases and problems in Louisiana to satisfy most research efforts. Andy, please.
Sure. Thanks, David. Thank you, Antique, for the introduction and the invitation today. I'm really excited to talk to you all. So let me share my screen, and I've got a whole bunch of images to show you. This is sort of work on the boards and work just off the boards, things underway. So some of these projects you may have seen before because we've been working on them for so long, but they're mostly focused in Louisiana. They're all focused in Louisiana. And while our work has grown to a lot of other places, it's really inspired by this place. And it's our first laboratory and really our first focus. So I'll start in New Orleans, a couple of things around New Orleans, and then broaden out to some state watershed planning work, and finally the Ile de Jean Charles relocation, where we're at on design work for that project. I will click by hand. So this is don't focus in too much on this image, but just take in the whole. And there's basically Katrina on the left and today on the right. And this is how our work has grown more or less since that time, our planning work specifically. We did some recovery planning work, the water plan, then in 2011, 2013 in the middle, and that light blue was a catalyst for us, for our office, and for a lot of other water projects and initiatives in the city. From education, things like ripple effect, water literacy, the water challenge, policies, new CZO, not so new, and many other resilience projects, like the Gentilly Resilience District, which you might be familiar with, and that suite of projects. I'll get into that a little bit more. And also something else I'll talk about, a recent downtown New Orleans mini water plan and projects that hopefully will come out of that. But this effort, this process that we've developed in New Orleans and that we've learned how to do together with many other experts and stakeholders has been replicated. And not only, as you see at the bottom, after Sandy and Isaac here, and some of the NDRC awards that are still funding work today, but lots of ongoing disasters and projects and increasingly, hopefully, pre-mitigation work, not just following these disasters. So just a little eye candy refresher from the water plan. This was the scope of our East Bank water plan finished back in 2013 with a lot of concepts, just really early kind of sketchy concepts embedded for an integrated system. The first piece, the first district scale piece to move towards implementation is Gentilly. So you see that highlighted in orange, and then Gentilly Resilience District. And then the second piece, like I mentioned, is downtown. So that's where we'll focus next here. So this is a project that we worked on with the city and with DDD. Just for context, I'm thinking about water opportunities, ways to mitigate flooding downtown, at the same time to add streetscape benefits, maybe refresh some of the park and public spaces. So these are just kind of major stakeholders in the area. I think most people on the call are probably familiar. But the two key things to keep in mind, the two key locations are Duncan Plaza and the Armstrong Lafitte area. These are the two main public spaces downtown, the two biggest. And they also remarkably are well positioned within the drainage system to make a huge impact in terms of water storage if they can be treated as such. They also tie in to the Lafitte Greenway, Lafitte Blueway proposal that maybe still can be realized in a visionary way in the future. So here you see the subsurface and kind of the overland flow system aligned. Basically, water that falls, rainwater that falls by the river is ultimately moving towards the lake. Finds the first drain that it can and goes into those darker blue lines, the subsurface canals, some of them big enough to drive a bus through. This is all things we're familiar with here, and move out towards the lake, towards the outfall canals. But the one to notice here is along Loyola Street. That's that orange line. That is a collector culvert for essentially all the water that falls downtown. And it flows underground, kind of along the streetcar tracks, right by Duncan Plaza. It flows to Armstrong Park and then makes a left-hand turn and goes out to pump station number 2, following along the Lafitte Greenway. So that culvert and that pathway is both a source of flooding when it backs up all the way downtown, up the slope towards the river. But it's also an opportunity because it parallels and touches these public assets, publicly owned spaces that might be retrofitted while maintaining their recreation use to alleviate the overburdened system. So that's where we focus. And here you see in section, there's a little map key in the bottom left, but these are basically working from the river on the right down towards past the highway. You see how the vertical scale is exaggerated to be able to see the change in topography. But you get these pockets of space of buildings and streets behind small ridges and changes in the landscape that end up causing flooding downtown. And then a lot bigger pockets and pooling the lower down the slope you get. So that'll play into a solution, a street scale solution in a minute. Just a bit of analysis underlying this project. On the left is basically the system, water system mapping that you saw before. On the right, really fine-grained LiDAR topography of the city. It's incredible resolution. You can see even some of the problem spots you might recognize just from your day-to-day experience around town when it's raining. But you'll notice that the two areas highlighted, that Duncan Plaza area, where you see those kind of arcing shapes here those are the berms in Duncan Plaza. And then Armstrong Park and Lafitte Greenway itself are higher in elevation than their surroundings. They're kind of that brown color, whereas surrounding them tend to be a little more blue. So it's kind of an inverted relationship right now. Those properties are actually shedding water into the drainage system when they could be collecting. And that's the basis of the proposal. Just you see a comparison with the historical map. What once was wet will become again. And some of the other analysis underlying this project surrounding urban heat. So not only does tree canopy reduce urban heat measurably, but the presence of open water as well. You see that very clearly in Armstrong Park. And there's some historical data going back 100 years documenting the pooling effect of open water in canals, old canals across the city. So I'll get back to those two main, Duncan Plaza and Lafitte Armstrong in a minute, but part of the proposal was for interceptor streets, working against that section that I showed you, that high ground to low ground topography. So trying to capture and store water where it falls before it can back up those main culverts. So we identified through a whole series of criteria these potential interceptor streets higher up in the landscape closer to the river. It could be retrofitted with really simple things that we've all seen before, these rain gardens, but strategically placed on certain streets and in certain rights of way to capture that upslope water. So that's part of it at every scale, starting from rain garden. But the big opportunities that we see are these public spaces for their ability to leverage investment around them and for the quality of life benefits they can bring themselves, not to mention the water system improvements. So the bigger vision is for a series of scenarios. It's not just one idea or one vision, but a series of development and park design and water system scenarios on these two locations. Duncan Plaza kind of treated as a whole with its larger context of City Hall and the VA property and the library. And then Armstrong and the Lafitte Greenway treated as a whole, also considering some of the housing developments alongside and the impounded neighborhoods all along the Lafitte Greenway that currently flood. And we'll show some potential benefit there. So this is just something to squint at, but you see a range of scenarios from kind of a minimal intervention to maximum. And these green shapes represent different types of water storage. It could be sunken garden type areas. So a playing field that's a foot or two below the street level that fills up when it rains, something like that. Or more of a paved sunken plaza area, or it could be water storage beneath a street or sidewalk, and kind of structured crates, that type of thing, gravel beds. So it's a whole range of possibilities. The green doesn't represent just open space, the green and yellow together. But the point is that this approach, these scenarios can be tweaked and tailored depending on stakeholders, available budgets, land, and still add up to more than the sum of their parts. So we took a kind of, let me go back one. The proposed scenario was kind of somewhere around between the mid and max. So we didn't go minimal and we didn't go max, but to show what we could try to accomplish. And I think what's an interesting takeaway here, so you see in the blue bars, reductions in total stormwater flooding. So that doesn't quite translate into water levels. There's a little bit of abstraction there, but you can just see scale of impact essentially. And the interesting thing to see, if you remember, I described the water system moving from downtown to Loyola, Duncan Plaza, around by Armstrong, and then up the Greenway. What you see is that the changes you make upstream in the CBD have the biggest potential impact around Chemay and Lafitte. So we're not only benefiting the place where you perform the project, we're benefiting system-wide, if you think about these opportunities as a network. Just to give you a sense of what the water level change, projected change might be, we took a series of locations around. So this one's down by the highway behind the Superdome. And if you work for any amount of time in stormwater New Orleans and stormwater modeling, if you can achieve a 2-inch or 3-inch or a 4-inch reduction in flood levels across a neighborhood, it's a pretty big deal. Those are the kind of reductions that were modeled across the Gentilly Resilience District, for example, maybe 6 inches, but district-wide, it's a lot of water. For the impact of these particular properties, Duncan and Lafitte, are huge. So we're seeing in some cases 8 inches, 9 inches. In this case, somewhere around 6 inches, 8 inches of flood reduction. I mean, over the scale of the CBD, that's a huge amount of water and a huge potential system benefit. So zooming in a little bit to these properties, again, this is very schematic and meant to be scenario based. So this is not one outcome. This is more just one kit of parts implementation. Everything from open water gardens, rain gardens, to permeable paving, all of the usual stuff, just deployed in a careful way, including a rethinking of Duncan Plaza itself. So some more dramatic change there. You see that detention basin in dark green. Could be any shape, could be other functions overlaid on top, pavilions, concert spaces, things like that. But a pretty fundamental rethinking of the purpose of that open space downtown in the stormwater sense. And this is just a schematic section working from Loyola on the right down to the highway. But even at the site scale, these elements combine as a system within a system. So what we're proposing is basically taking water out of that main culvert at Loyola, providing a relief valve that could fill up parts of Duncan Plaza only when it's raining, and some of these surrounding sites to be redeveloped in some form. Moving to Lafitte, I know there's a lot of images, and this is just the first project, so I'm trying to stay on time. But please ask questions in the chat if you have them. Happy to talk more. So the vision for Lafitte is something like the Lafitte Blueway that was proposed in the water plan. Before that, even the Lafitte master plan, there's been a whole lot of proposals. The first key here for us is the old location of the turning basin, and that's down there next to, on Basin Street, next to the municipal auditorium. And that's where that culvert turns, that culvert under Loyola turns and heads out to the pump station. And it's a critical point in the system to provide a relief valve, what they call inline storage. So you're taking water out of the pipe and storing it within the system. And then it would drop back down after rain passes. But this is a key opportunity to tie into one of the oldest, most historic places in the city that was built around water historically. That turning basin that came down the canal from the bayou is the reason why the French Quarter is there. So, and it's right next to Congo Square. It's aligned with Jackson Square, the key axis in the city. It could be one of the key moments for the identity of the city, tying to our deepest roots. If we can get some water back in there and serve the dual function of alleviating flooding up and downstream. It's just, I could evangelize about this thing forever. It's an amazing opportunity. Now, not to mention the conversations about relocating portions of City Hall, eventually a new civic center in New Orleans at the auditorium, changes to Armstrong Park. Could keep going. But this is just one sketch from, we've revised a little bit from way back in the water plan. So not necessarily a current proposal, just a snapshot of what coverage condition might look like at this side of the turning basin. And another farther up. Wouldn't it be great if you could kayak or canoe from the bayou all the way down the French Quarter like you could have done 150 years ago? It'd be pretty cool. And then that feature could fill up when it rains. Okay. That's the downtown piece. So that's work that's happened over the last 6, 8, 9 months maybe, and hopefully can coalesce an energy around those projects with some other redevelopment ideas downtown and move forward.
Andy, quick question before you move on from that, and also just a note to use every once in a while your mic gets a little choppy, wondering, so with the idea of having Duncan Plaza and Armstrong Park be more hospitable to water, using them somewhat as detention, does that have any benefit as well in terms of the ground soil, or is it simply to get the water out of the culverts?
Definitely both. It's a topic that I think needs a little bit more investigation because the soil conditions on the high ground are different from somewhere out like Gentilly, where subsidence itself might not be the driver of risk from soil, whereas something like a shrink swell cycle is more important to think about. It's cracking streets, but not necessarily sinking in the same way that those areas out by the lake are. So it's all part of the same groundwater system, needs to be put into balance, whether that means adding water, sometimes just balancing, I think is a huge area of more investigation. Good question though. Yeah, it's new meaning to thinking 3D for an architect. You kind of turn your head upside down and look underground. But okay, Gentilly Resilience District. This has been in the works for a long time, was initially proposed way back in the Dutch dialogues. That was in 2008, that little sketch on the left. An idea about canals, recirculating water storage in the neighborhood, retrofitting the London Avenue Canal. That idea was elaborated in the water plan. So now we're up to 2013 or so. The water plan was wrapped into the Resilient New Orleans plan. Those ideas, working with the city, became the basis of the city's National Disaster Resilience request, which was successful and for $140 million in federal funding, and that this project is ongoing. So a suite of projects were funded in Gentilly, from Blue-Green Network, Blue-Green Corridors, literally new open canals, to the Mirbeau Water Garden. It's a little bit of a separate funding story, but part of the same district. I'll talk a little bit more about that in particular. And then a lot of smaller scale features tied together that add up into a network. A lot of firms in town, different firms are working on these projects. I think it's a great example of collaboration and with the city and the kind of ecosystem and community of expertise that we can build up here, to David's point about what we learn here and what we take elsewhere, treating this work as a real living laboratory. So part of the district, of course, is about mitigating flooding, and there's some measurable reductions and some modeling behind these projects. City Park is a key part of this project. Also an ongoing project that we're working on with Batcher Engineering to find a way to add a little more stormwater storage, especially into the northern parts of City Park. But it's a real comprehensive look at the lagoon system, which currently drains out of the park. There's inlets from the bayou, fill up the lagoons and keep the water levels stable, and any additional water is moving out into the drainage system. It's another opportunity to reverse and let water back in when it's raining. Similar condition to opening up those buried culverts around Duncan Plaza. There's another one under Robert E. Lee along the north side, which could feed stormwater storage in the park while alleviating flooding surrounding, neighborhood surrounding. So another one that's still underway. There was this much earlier idea about a blue-green network, maybe associated with transportation. That's being implemented in a way, and this is a drawing from Stantec and Batcher, but this is the current iteration of those blue-green corridors and some of the bigger neutral grounds around Gentilly, networking up into this larger water system that can be expanded over time. But one of the keystone projects in the district is the Mirbeau Water Garden, and this is one that we've been working on for a long time, and hopefully will be breaking ground soon, any day now, hopefully in the next couple of months, maybe 6 months. But it's been ready to go for a while. And you may have seen this and may seen some of these images before. So, but I think there's some other examples in this project that maybe you aren't aware of. So this was a 25-acre site on Mirbeau Avenue near the bayou. It used to be a Sisters of St. Joseph's home. This building flooded and then burned after Katrina. And there's just some remnant hill in the landscape where the building used to be, elevated ground, and then this piece of their terrazzo that was at the front door. That's all that's left, besides the legacy of the sisters in the neighborhood and the legacy of their goodwill. And I think the park is really what the park will become. They dedicated the land, long-term lease to the city for environmental education and stormwater management as a neighborhood asset. So what we've proposed is another way to take water out of the overburdened system, in addition to taking water overland from the neighborhood and providing space in the park to store it. So there's a pump station in this upper left corner that's drawing water from underground when that pipe is full, and then allowing it to cascade across the landscape, across this if you squint at it, it looks like some of the patterns you might see in a marsh restoration, or some of the, I hope there are some familiar patterns to our local eyes. This landscape can fill up and then ultimately slowly drain after the storm passes. So earlier kind of concept rendering, it's a little wet when it rains a little bit, and it gets a lot wet when it rains a lot. And it's a active and passive system combined. The importance of this site in the larger water system is twofold. it's a really particular site that just coincidentally almost is available and happens to be really well located at the top of the watershed. So sort of the way in downtown, where the projects you do in Duncan Plaza and Armstrong benefit everybody else downstream in remarkable ways. This project, the Mirbo site on the high ground, was quote upstream in the man-made drainage system, can benefit everybody else downstream throughout the neighborhood before water goes into the London Avenue Canal. So that's what you see in the dark purple is the site itself, how it's kind of perfectly located upstream. But the second aspect is what's below ground. And you may be familiar from Richard Campanella or others about the Pine Island sand trend runs underneath Gentilly, runs all the way out to Mississippi past Christiane. It's a remnant dune structure from when the coast of Louisiana ran through Gentilly, before the Delta was here, before the river created the rest of the Delta. There were a series of barrier islands framing Lake Pontchartrain. And all of that pristine white beach sand is right below the surface in parts of Gentilly, including on this site. You can literally just stick a garden spade in the ground in some places and pull out white beach sand. And sand is really good at infiltrating stormwater. It's very porous, much more porous than the rest of the clay and silt in the soil surrounding here. So if we can, part of the location of the excavation on site is meant to maximize that infiltration potential. So that's what you see. Water comes up out of the pump station, flows across the site to where this Pine Island sand is real close to the surface as a way to infiltrate water and aid all the more in groundwater balance in the neighborhood and stormwater storage. So just to look at the architecture, it's kind of a funky building with a big roof. And the roof is the most important thing. With a demonstration cistern and some opportunities around the building to observe pumps, look down into the pump well and see where the water is coming out of the building and then spreading across the landscape. There's a future phase on the site, those lighter orange boxes, a kind of environmental education campus, series of pavilions that we hope to continue working on. And then the site and landscape, in addition to preserving trees there today, will grow over time and be one of the largest constructed urban wetlands that we're aware of in the country. So, cool roof looking back. Okay, that's New Orleans. I'll move out now to the watershed planning scale and then touch on Ile de Jean Charles at the end, but maybe pause there if there's Antique, I see you're unmuted.
I am. So there are a couple questions. I seem to be full of questions myself, but from what you just covered, for City Park, I think you were focusing, you said there's a large park that's like on the north end, which happens to be where a rather expensive golf course is. Is there any push? Does it create any kind of threat to that that's creating pushback, or does it contemplate, protecting that revenue generator for the park?
This is a diagram that's probably 4 or 5 years old. That was part of the funding proposal. So all that blue is a little scary, I think, and not exactly what's being proposed now. So it's much more targeted to the space that exists around the lagoons. The golf course, although golf courses are open space that aren't used when it's raining.
Yeah.
So if it did flood Antique, there would be water that would then back up through the enhanced lagoon system and flood some of the golf course. But that would be in a catastrophe and keep the neighborhoods from flooding. Basically, on the west side is where the water would enter. It might enter as far over as the USDA site. We're still negotiating that passage across Robert E. Lee. A project like this, interestingly, I think has great benefit to Lakeview, because if you're taking the water out here, the drainage system is moving onto Lakeview, so your water levels in Lakeview drop by virtue of this. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of where water falls and where it runs and where it floods. But this has been worked through with the park, and you can bet that Bob's probably not going to let us flood that golf course.
All right, 2 more questions. Thank you. So there is a question about to keep up with these projects and make students familiar with them and the occupations related to them, you know, who would one contact and how does one keep track of that?
It's like workforce development type question.
Ramel?
Yes, hi, Andy. Romel here. I'm asking that because surprisingly, I'm working with a good colleague. I've been involved in education here in the city of New Orleans for about 13 years at one of the local high schools at one point, but now working with a colleague who is working with some students in the area, looking at these type of infrastructure projects currently. And I'm curious to know, and they're looking at exposing them to what type of jobs they could be looking into. This ranging from students being in high school all the way to just finishing college. So I'm curious to know, in speaking about these type of projects, who can I contact for, say, like how we're doing this currently, if I wanted this to be shown to those students that's in that program currently?
David?
Well, I was going to say that the Genesis program was Ripple Effect, and that was set up to educate kindergarten through really elementary school kids. But that program is expanded through middle and high school now. And I would think, Ronell, that if that Ripple Effect would be a good place to start, because that's several years of research. You know, there are programs like Dillard has about workforce training. There's a component of that in the Gentilly Resilience District funding. Tulane has some further programs, and certainly, so it really depends on the student and the ambition or place. But between us and then there's Groundworks, which is a great success story with training people to build this and maintain this. So there's a wide array of jobs, and somebody who's who's 34 or somebody who's 13 would be looking at different aspects of that. But I think we can connect more on that, and I think Ripple Effect would be the thing I would write down right now and say that's a good place to start.
Okay, so is it possible for me to get your contact or someone else on here so I can continue that conversation after this presentation?
Absolutely.
You know, I'll flash my email up at the end.
Great, appreciate it.
Just Andy@WBAE.
.com.
Yeah.
Renell, that's actually the best question that we can get. You know, how do kids learn how to do this, right? So the Ripple Effect program is about teaching kids about water and design. And of course they learn math, and of course they learn science, and of course they learn about the world because it's tangible. So it's a great question.
All right, 2 more questions for y'all before you move on, Andy. So for Mirabu, does the fact, by example, but for any project where there's expected to be collection of water so it doesn't go through the drainage and into the streets, does it create any concerns about mosquitoes?
That's always the top concern, always brought up, and it's a good question. We typically design to be fully dry within 48 hours, and that's kind of the magic time frame. If we can eliminate standing water within that time frame, it reduces the mosquito load. However, it's another one of those questions to continue to investigate. We obviously can't introduce disease vectors at the same time we're trying to solve another problem. So another way to answer that might be through natural solutions. So within the 48 hours in a project like this, there's going to be a lot of critters and frogs out there that will help us out. So, but the 48 hours is the key metric that we design towards.
Because 72 might be a more precise period if you were at the long end, but 48's at the mosquito board is quite good here, unfortunately. But they are not worried about this. This is a system that flows, and the water that overflows would come back into the drainage system after going this long course. But as Andy said, that's the first question that you have to address. Tulane also, Josh Lewis has been monitoring, so the mosquito population, at least in Gentilly where this situates, is actually well known now. And so there'll be a constant monitoring of that throughout the life of the, well, for a while during the startup of the project.
So now the questions are flowing. I'm going to ask this one more one that's specific to Marabou and then let you carry on, and we'll catch the other ones at the end. The question that's specific to Marabou is there a dedicated funding source or plan for the maintenance of the Marabou garden and rain gardens? Love the concept of rain gardens, but have noticed that when they're put in, they're often not maintained.
David, maybe a question for you too. I'm not familiar.
Well, this is the peculiarity of our city. I'm going to be maybe harsh, but normally if you had a gift of 25 acres of land and you had federal funding for it, you would have some institution that would come in and treat this as a research station. In our city, we don't have anybody quite to step up. I mean, I think we've been through Loyola, who still would, if they could, operate this. Surgeon Water Board is a default condition, but not optimal. Parks and Parkways is a default position, but not optimal. So what it really is a project in search of somebody who can take care of it. The Catholic Church, lots of problems in the Catholic Church, but that empty space on the knoll over there where the convent used to be is intended to have environmental education facilities in them. I really don't know, whoever asked the question, why it takes us so long to kind of accept an opportunity. But I maintain my faith with the sisters that somebody will step up here and that this will be well loved. It's also not designed to require a great deal of maintenance. It's not at the scale of a rain garden. It doesn't have to operate at that scale. So we're really trying to utilize low maintenance landscapes. Could talk much more about that. We've had many ideas about how to make sure this thing stays right. The water system itself, though, is the Sewage and Water Board.
Well, thank you. Andy, if you want to carry on, and we'll try to catch these other ones at the end, that would be awesome.
Let me go for 5 or 6 more minutes and probably get 20 more questions when you hear about Judge John Charles. But this is great. Participation is awesome. Sometimes these are deadly. Sorry, a little raw about Zoom meetings these days. So LA Safe is also funded by the same source as Gentilly Resilience District, NDR funding, National Disaster Resilience, ultimately coming from HUD. But this is zooming out and looking at a 6-parish region around the Delta, basically. It doesn't include Orleans. Basically, the scope of on this map up to St. Tammany, down to Plaquemines, over to Lafourche and Terrebonne, up to St. John. So it's a plan that's looking long-term at adaptation. LA Safe stands for Louisiana Strategic Adaptations to Future Environments. And it's really looking fundamentally at the ground, in the high and low ground, who's on it now, how best to use this finite resource for long-term stability. And a whole host of other environmental factors and natural solutions. It's fundamentally a landscape plan based on elevation. There you saw the delta that once was. Here's the delta that might be with in the future, in parentheses, with action. That's with the coastal master plan implemented, and the impact it's expected to have. It won't be. It will never be fully restored to its past extent, but nevertheless, potential significant impact that would further protect these slivers of high ground, this finite resource that we've got. So that's kind of a base condition for this study. And then what those flood risks look like, different areas, what base flood elevations we're looking at. So a whole host of other factors went into the determination of risk zones. And then those zones influence what to do in them in a strategic, long-term, adaptive kind of way. One thing we could talk a lot more about is the legacy of high ground industry, where we might prefer other types of inhabitation patterns on that safest land. But we mapped these risk zones across this 6-parish region. You see those outlined in black. We also analyzed elevation, and this was all part of a suite of reports and documents available online. I'll get there in a second. It's a very high-level summary. Looked at subsidence, the natural consequence of building levees and pumping within them, or at least pumping the way that we have. So every levee that's built on the Louisiana Delta causes subsidence. I don't know of a case anyway where it hasn't. And then an overlay for ecology and infrastructure. Many, many more maps. There's a whole host of these that's available. But again, similar systems thinking to downtown, to all these other things we've been talking about, Gentilly, understanding of the impact of parts and whole across systems, and what their mutual benefits can be, more than the sum of the parts. So we created, with a lot of other partners, an overall regional approach, and then there's an approach per parish, each of those 6 parishes. And a lot of this thinking has influenced the Louisiana Watershed Initiative underway, kind of watershed scale planning across the whole state. But there you see lasafe.la.gov, lots more information there. Main goals, writ large, flooding and subsidence, how to stabilize long-term growth, mobility and transportation, the economy, and cultural assets. So those were also mapped. There's a whole series of chapters about that. But one that I'll return to in a minute here is shifting populations, and how we're already seeing this ad hoc migration away from the coast. And the first real coordinated example of that is the Ile-de-Jean-Charles relocation, which I'll end on in a minute, in Terrebonne Parish. But the point being, I guess, that this is already happening in a way that we should acknowledge and begin to plan for. So here's Terrebonne Parish itself, excerpts from that parish scale document, similar types of analysis, similar layers. This will set the groundwork for Ile-de-Jean-Charles, which plugs into the same principles, demonstrates these principles. 50-year vision includes ecological restoration, accounts for relocation, economies, cultures. LA Safe included 6 pilot project designs for each of the 6 parishes, so 36 pilot projects proposed. Those range in scale from something like this, a harbor of refuge and a seafood market, so a place where fishermen could pull their boats when the storms come in and close a gate, or behind the gate, to Gretna City Park in Jefferson Parish. That's a project that we're proceeding with right now. Actually should start construction in the spring. Something like it's a project like Mirabeau on the West Bank. But one of those 6 projects per parish was funded through this grant program. So, and that's how Gretna City Park came to be. That was the chosen project for Jefferson Parish. But each parish has its own project in some stage of working towards completion. Okay, Ile-de-Jean-Charles is not directly part of LA Safe, but illustrates its principles, and is happening in parallel. So if you're not familiar, Ile-de-Jean-Charles is a spit of land at the end of the marsh. That's what you see here, this kind of spit of high ground along the old bayou. This is the home of the Biloxi Chickamauga Choctaw tribe, a branch of the UHC, United Homa Nation, or UHN. They have lived here. Their ancestors were pushed here to the fringe of the marsh during the Indian Wars and the Trail of Tears era, and have basically existed, and sometimes subsistence existed here on their own until climate change came to them, and marsh loss and energy industry impacts, on and on. So this place that was once their refuge and generational home is now at risk constantly of flooding and storm surge. It's outside the levee protection system, and is planned to be bypassed by the Morganza to the Gulf levee. So you can see the eroded marsh and how basically they're on the Gulf now. whereas once they were fully surrounded, protected by marsh. So the tribe initiated plans to relocate themselves as a community. This was over the past 10, 15 years maybe, and was successful in winning a federal grant. And that's where we ended up ultimately coming into the picture to help design the new community where they plan to move to. So this is Island Road going out to the island today. It's a little hard to tell that water level is actually at the road level. It looks like it's built up on the berm a little bit, but it's basically at the road level. If there's a south breeze, this road is overtopped with water on a sunny day. So the situation is pretty dire, not to mention storms coming by. Zeta Island flooded, has to be evacuated routinely. They've already lost gas service. Electrical supply is probably not going to be put back if that's cut off, if the road is cut off. So they got to go, they need to move, and they've been planning to do that. This is a kind of a snapshot of the condition on the island, kind of the scale of structures and their elevation. They're not up that high because they want to be. That's how high they need to be to avoid surge outside the levee. It's probably about 40 households remaining on the island today that are relocating together. At one time, the community might have been 2 or 3 times that large on the island. So through a long process, they won federal funding in 2016 as part of the NDR grant. So that's when this project really was formalized. But through a whole long process that's played out since then, community has selected to relocate to a new site inside the levee system, and maintain some right to their homestead on the island, but move their permanent residence to a new site between Thibodeau and Homa. Here's what the new site looks like from the air. It's currently sugarcane fields. It's about 500 acres, so it's not an insignificant site with this kind of naturalized wetland condition and a canal at the center of the site. And then in the background there, you see Highway 24 with a commercial spine between. It's a lot of sugarcane, but there are also some ancient assets on the site, including these trees. So something to take advantage of, tying back to culture and ecology and the natural landscape. So just a size comparison, what 500 acres means. To give you a sense, it's two-thirds bigger than the French Quarter, maybe. Here's the overall site plan. So on the left there, you see Highway 24. At the center is the wetland condition with the St. Louis Canal. On the right side, in that yellow, is the high ground. So the high ground on the site is along 24, along Bayou Terrebonne there. That's that blue line in the neutral ground, in the median. And then Bayou Blue in the yellow zone. And you're familiar with the landscape in Louisiana with the high ground along the old bayous. So those are 2 old bayous with the most stable ground. There's a little bit of a tension, which I'll get to, about in traditional type planning, you locate density around transportation, closer to the roads, transit-oriented development. We're familiar with that. In this case, the community preferred to be more secluded and try to recreate more like their island life. So there's a little bit of a tension between connection and solitude. But I'm wrapping up here. I know we're about right at time, but there's the site from the air and this master plan we've proposed. We worked on this with Olin Landscape Architects out of Philadelphia. You see on the left side, Highway 24, the commercial economic heart. There's some commercial development, an orchard, some community market spaces proposed along that edge, whose revenue is meant to fund or help subsidize some of the project and the ongoing expense of the site. There's a new water management feature, new island there with a community center, and then this woven pattern of streets through the residential proposal. It's designed for about 150 households. So that's that historic number on the island. Phase 1 will be about 40 households. But the pattern of streets in these scalloped edges is meant to collect the view sheds from each house into a natural feature, whether it's reconstituted bayou or a wetland behind them, trying to keep neighbors out of each other's backyards, because that's the overwhelming feature of the current island. It's a natural condition as far as you can see behind you. And a little bit of the hydrology, both working with the natural and also new hydrology to reconstitute this historic bayou blue. Store water on site, filter. Here's that scallop proposal, these pockets of in the residential development where homes are kind of, the view from the backyard is collected towards natural features. We developed a whole series of prototype designs for the homes, and the residents can choose. So trying to tie back to the landscape those forms that you saw from the island itself. A lot of work thinking about setbacks and character in addition to water management on these new residential streets, trying to give some semblance of where the community came from, where they currently live. Lots of workshops on the island. I promise I just have 3 slots left. And here's that new island with the ponds and the community center. This is kind of a gateway to the community. Crossing bridges, passing across this island through the new lakes to get to what hopefully they'll think of as their new home. And then trail network running across the site. Community center in the background. So that's it. And just maybe a message at the end that returning to David's point about lessons from Louisiana, and sometimes the lessons are right around us, I think. And sometimes we take them for granted, what natural conditions we have and what they mean and how they work together already as a system. We're able to adapt the way we live and fit better within it. I think we can be a leading example for a lot of other places that are soon to face the challenges we're facing now. So if you've got other questions, and then David can jump back in and answer too.
There were 2 lingering questions from before that I'll read to y'all quickly. So one was, I think, referring back to the Mirabou project again, how can one get involved with looking at types of projects like that for New Orleans East, or for that matter, for any other areas within our greater New Orleans area, Louisiana area?
It's that is kind of the right question again. You know, look in your neighborhood and see where there's space. Try to understand how it fits in the watershed. Even New Orleans East has a high ground in the middle, and well, actually has of course the land fill is highest, but how does it work in the landscape? We've looked in the water plan at New Orleans East, of course, and we've worked with the people out there looking at opportunities. So I think look at the water plan, look at the New Orleans East part, and then look at your neighborhood. I mean, when James Gray was council person, he started watching the water levels in the canals. And one of the things is they operate the canal water levels at that point, 16 feet below sea level. And the water level is going to predict the ground level in a soft soil like this, because the water in that canal, if it's drawn down, will also draw down the groundwater next to it and the ground next to it. So if you start to observe in your neighborhood where the water is and how high it is and subsidence ratios and all that, but for Mirabou project, you have to find a larger piece of land. Those are hero-like projects, so where are the larger pieces of land that could be utilized and could be a community redevelopment asset?
Yeah, David, that was a question that came from me just a minute ago as it relates to Eastern New Orleans. And that's where I again look to find out the avenues of who needs to be spoken to find out more information as it relates to it. Like, for instance, I know that we have several neighborhoods out in this area that have like neighborhood lakes. I'm not sure if those lakes are tied into the system or not. So and as you stated, I know there are certain areas of high ground. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that along Chef Highway, which is high ground in Eastern New Orleans, that would also have that sandbar barrier that goes all the way out to past Christian. And also knowing that some of the land loss is projected to be in the furthest parts of Eastern New Orleans, I think around the wildlife refuge. So I would love to talk with people as it relates to how we can get this stuff started in the Eastern New Orleans area as well, if I can be pointed in the right direction.
Well, I welcome the conversation with you directly, Ronell. We need advocates. I mean, we looked at 3 or 4 projects that could happen out there. I mean, you can look all the way from Six Flags all the way back to the redevelopment next to the hospital that could occur for project areas. And there are many things you can do. So please, we welcome you to contact us and continue the discussion.
Cool.
And the lakes aren't really connected to the water system very much. They're actually operating parallel and mostly independently.
Thank you for that. I'll make sure I get your information before we end the call as well.
The last question that was submitted, which was also a little bit ago, but was a question about the implementation of green roofs, particularly in commercial spaces in the CBD. Would they have many benefits for surrounding neighborhoods? What would you recommend for implementation? Are there tax incentives, mandates, subsidies, et cetera?
Andy, you want to talk about it? I mean, it's obvious. If the structure can take it, it'll have great benefit. The runoff will be slow. The environment will get cooler. I had a call with Rotterdam this week, and they just think they should be everywhere. I mean, the benefits are great. Do you have the structure? Do you have a qualified roofer to put that roof on? It's harder to inspect. But this is an industry that, I mean, we should be having green roofs in New Orleans, Louisiana, especially downtown, because the streets are going to run the water off. The buildings can slow it down. There are also these ecological benefits that occur. The air gets better. It's cooler. Bugs are happier. Not termites, hopefully.
I'm not familiar with particular programs or incentives. The small scale solutions like green roofs, rain gardens, rain barrels, totally crucial and critical. However, I would just say that the big scale projects are also critical. So we're not going to solve the problems that we have by either one alone. Both needed.
And I think part of the question, which I read incorrectly, was have y'all seen work elsewhere, or would y'all think that it would work better to have something like incentives through tax breaks, or do you think there's a necessity for mandates and subsidies or subsidies?
I would say, I think we did the Greater New Orleans Foundation was building on Lee Circle, and that project doesn't have a green roof, but as a site, it holds the first 10 inches of water. 10 inches of rain can fall before there's any runoff from that site, because the solution is in the courtyard, in the garden in the back. And that's building on the city's stormwater requirements that are already in place. The first inch of water must be held. If you take that regulation as written as opportunity to create garden on a project around a building, you could store it underground, could store it in a green roof, or you could use regulations already in place to improve a project and the experience of people who will be there. So I think I see those things more as opportunities as a designer to take the regulation and make a space that's better for people.
But to be optimistic, Antique, if we had an administration that prioritized that, and I don't mean locally, but if that were a federal program, I think people would figure out how to do it. I think we need it all over the place. The poorer cities like ours have a harder time doing it. And I would say the only incentive we really have right now is the deferred one about having a sort of tax or runoff fee on your property. If I had a runoff fee, I would want to hold more of that water. But we don't have that. So that's a negative thing. The carrot part has got to come from the federal government because the state's not probably able to do it right now either. There's a combination of solar and green that the researchers in Rotterdam are finding to be really good. And so I think you know, it's again, how much we want to advance the agenda and how slow we are to make these adaptations, given that our city's fairly low and the water's rising. You know, one of the reasons our work progresses is people take us seriously because we're from New Orleans. Oh, you poor people are going to flood, right? So, you know, we don't, maybe food and maybe football and maybe water, we get taken seriously for. Music. But I think that those incentives are going to potentially come from this next administration if we're successful in making the case.
Well, guys, thank you so much for not only bringing all this and being willing to share it with us, but also for lingering on later than we had told you it would be. And I love, you know, like you said, Andy, it's rough when there's not participation. And so thank you all so much for participating and being able to make connections. Ramel, with you to people like Andy and David is one of the great benefits of doing this kind of thing. So that's awesome. So thank you all so much for participating. Our next content hour next Thursday is focused on the Odeon. So very different look at land use, but we welcome and hope to see you all there. And thank you all so much. Have a lovely Thursday. Oh, Ramel, what you got?
Yeah, and I'm just curious to know, because I see your name says Antique Landis. Is that with the developing group Landis?
We're a general contractor, so Landis Construction. Yep.
Okay, just checking. I need David's information, and I wouldn't mind having yours as well if that's at all possible. How can I get that?
I'll just type it in the chat for you.
DAVID@WBAE.com.
So DAVID at
WBAE.com.
.com. Okay. And Miss Ann?
I am AT Landis at landisllc.com.
This LLC.com.
That's it.
Okay, awesome. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed this information.
Yeah, look forward to hearing from you. So
Absolutely.
thanks again, y'all. Really appreciate it. Thank you, participants, for your participation, and have a really blessed evening.
Bye, guys.
You take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.